guys, I'm Kate. Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to talk about books. More specifically, I want to talk about the books that I read in January. But I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I have my friendly little timer here, and I'm going to challenge myself to review these books in less than a minute. One, because I'm going to be focusing more on the writing and the storytelling rather than an actual review of the book in the traditional plot-based sense. So two, I'll put the Goodreads links down below for each of these books if you want to check out more about them. And then three, no spoilers, so no worries. And this past month, I read 6 books in total. That is a great month for me. Again, I've set my 2019 yearly reading goal to just 25 books because I had so much trouble last year. So 6 out of 25 is a great freaking start. We're gonna do a stats roundup real quick. 2 of these 6 books were nonfiction, 2 were rereads, 3 were young adult, all within the same series. 4 of the books were in physical form and 2 were ebooks, and then 1 was a classic novel. So yeah, y'all know I love my stats. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I'm going to start with the Vampire Academy series by Richelle Mead. I read the first 3 books of this series practically back to back. I devoured them. Now, I had a physical copy for the first book. Ooh. But the second and third book I read on my phone through the Libby app with my library. And I'm actually going to lump all 3 of these together. This is the one that I think I'm going to have the hardest time talking about in under a minute, but you know what? It's a challenge. And start. First up, the voice, Rose frickin' Hathaway. It is so sharp and so witty and so funny, and it's so clear. Like, there's no confusing it. I think I'd be able to pick up any kind of Vampire Academy book, not know that it was that book, and I'd be able to read it and know what it was because the voice is that good. Also, there's forbidden romance in this series, which, gimme the forbidden romance. I love all of it, and not only that, but I actually think this is one of the best series that I've read the forbidden romance in. It has an age gap and a bit of a power gap, but it's done so well. It doesn't feel force-fed to the reader, and it doesn't feel gross and also not unrealistic. Which leads me into, I love that you can see the character progression in each book by what Richelle Mead chooses for Rose to focus on when she's describing the story, because Rose is also the narrator. Oh my gosh! It's already time. I'm gonna continue on. I will not be stopped. I knew this one was gonna be a challenge. You can really see her development from this younger girl to a more serious Dampier. She's able to keep her bite throughout books 1 through 3, and the growth also doesn't feel out of left field because ultimately it was always at the core of who Rose was. She wanted to be this great protector for her friend. Really, she's just gaining more skill across the 3 books and even more ultimately wisdom. The epic end of the 3rd book though made me cry. OM frickin' G. It was like a knife to the heart. The death count absolutely rises in these books as the story goes along. I think adding to that seriousness of Rose's personality that's beginning to come forth. But the end of this book frickin' broke me. Also, just something I think is interesting about the Vampire Academy books is that they really rode that first wave of the YA trend within publishing. YA is now such a huge powerhouse, and so when this first book was published, when was this published? This does not help my time. This first book was published in 2007, and actually all of the series, not counting the spin-offs, concluded in 2010. So Twilight was already in its heyday, and Meg Cabot had already been my YA queen for years, but this really rode that first wave, which is really cool and phenomenal, and I think we owe a lot of what YA is now to books like this. And finally, I do just want to say, after reading this first book and the next 2, I can appreciate people who don't like the Vampire Academy movie. But I'm trash and I still love it. I don't care. Don't judge me. Okay, wow, I did awful with the time here. That's totally fine. Next up, let's move on to one of the nonfiction books I read, and actually one of the rereads for January, and that is On Writing by Stephen King. Now, there is a copy of this book that I own somewhere that I can't find. Perhaps in boxes of books somewhere still. So I did ultimately end up borrowing this from the library. And now, before I start the timer, I should probably preface all of this by saying I have not actually read any of Stephen King's novels. So take this next part as you will. And start. Okay. I wanted to make that preface because ultimately this book is half writing craft and half memoir, and actually I think you see all of Stephen King's writing talent in the memoir portion of this book, and then also in that second half of the craft portion. But you can see him practice what he preaches. I think that his writing is good, and that's obviously evident by the mega millions he has made off of his multiple published novels. Also, what I find interesting is that in the writing advice section of this book, King has a way of saying, this is my opinion, but also my opinion is right, which is an interesting dynamic, and yet he still manages to pull it off because ultimately, again, he's sold so many copies of books. I think you can boil a lot of his tips down to readability, and he also has a heavy focus on precision, which again, I think ultimately wraps up into this readability aspect. He's very much use the words you mean and trust the reader to understand. He's also anti-adverb and anti-dialogue tags other than said, again, for readability purposes. Alright, I have one last bullet point. I'm gonna get it. Stephen King really does, again, tend to practice what he preaches, and I think he makes the point that you can only occasionally, rarely, break the rules, and it's because you're doing it so infrequently that it still works. Now, that being said, I think it's important to note that Stephen King's style is not for everyone. Some people like more lyrical prose, and that is not what you're gonna get from this book, nor is it what he advises. Now I want to talk about the classic novel I read for the month and my other reread, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I will be diving more in depth to this book in my Cooking with Classics series, and I already know I'm going to be making scones. I'm so excited. But let's go ahead and start. This story, y'all. This freaking story. This is one of my favorite stories of all time, and I'm making the important distinction between story and novel because I have a whole lot of feelings about this book. The movie is one of my favorites. I even have an appreciation for the miniseries. But this book, for the second time, has been really hard for me to get into the first half of the novel. It is a chore and I have to push myself, and the only reason that I do push myself is because I know that I love the story that it's telling. That being said, the dialogue is snappy, the characters are vivid. Mr. Bennet, freaking Mr. Bennet, you guys. He's kind of like an asshat, to be totally honest, but I adore him. And I love the specific word choice that Jane Austen uses around the dialogue just to make those characters even more vivid in her descriptions. I'm not getting any of these in another 60 seconds. But the biggest reason I have trouble getting into this book is that there will be pages on end, just whole chapters almost, where it's nothing but telling. I'm not following the characters anywhere. It's not like we're witnessing a scene sometimes. Often it would be like, this happened and then this happened, and because this happened, then this happened. And it's not, again, it's not like you're seeing it, and I don't know if this is because I often picture a movie in my head while I'm reading. Like, I really do just get transported to a different place. So when you're just telling me this happened and then this happened, I cannot picture the movie. There is no movie. You're just telling me. Oh, and it makes me feel like I'm at war with myself for the first half of this book, and then something changes, and the second half of the novel is so good, and it's so good in a way that I find both the movie and the miniseries to be lacking in. And that's what makes this novel such a struggle for me. The only other thing I want to say real quick is that I'm actually shocked how early on Mr. Darcy is clearly infatuated with Lizzie, something both the movie and the miniseries, again, failed to properly convey to me. I swear it's like on page 30 something where you can tell that he's like a little bit smitten. Anyways, more details to come. I obviously pulled some receipts. I will be ready to delve into this beauty in a little bit. Now, for my final read of the month, I read No Baggage by Clara Benson. I love travelogues because, hello, read, write, roam. Travel is one of my absolute favorite things. So let's go ahead and set the timer because I would argue that this is my most disappointing read of the month. Start. This book has such a freaking cool premise, okay? It is 1 dress, 3 weeks, 8 countries, 0 baggage. This is so cool. And not only that, but it's like she's traveling with a guy, she just started dating. I'm ready. You have sold me something amazing, and it does not deliver that. It's more accurately about a quarter-life crisis that I'm not sure the author is supposed to be already through or is still working through or what, but I read a lot of travelogues, so I'm very used to like self-reflection within these kind of books, and it kind of goes hand in hand with when you're traveling to a new place, but this was such a chore to get through in parts. I also did not like Jeff, which is a pain because she's traveling with Jeff. I felt like slapping them both upside the head. Jeff because ugh, but then Clara because she's putting up with way more than I felt like she needed to put up with. Oh. And it's not like Jeff is awful or evil or anything, but he's just ugh. And as it turns out, traveling with ugh people is not fun, and also neither is reading about it. Rather than being this like epic travel story, it ends up being monotonous. It becomes so monotonous between the struggle between her and Jeff and then the struggle within herself. It promised me one thing and it doesn't deliver that. And the writing ultimately is actually pretty good, but when you've been promised something and you're not delivered it, and in fact you're delivered something entirely different, the best writing in the world could not save that. I also wanted to love this book because Clara is from Texas too. I wanted to like, and they actually start out in Austin. That's where they meet, that's where they live. It made me sad that it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. Ultimately. That being said, this book actually did start out as an online article at salon.com, which I think is super cool from a publishing standpoint, that someone picked this up because they liked the other one so much. It's just very cool to see how that happens. All right, that's everything I read in January. Please comment down below and let me know what you read this past month. Did you have a favorite novel of the ones you read? And also, how often do you reread books? This is like part of a different discussion, but because of my lack of space and my inability to find books, apparently, looking at you on writing, I'm debating getting rid of some of my books and donating them to the library based on a system of how easy it is to find copies of those books, let's say at the library, in case I did ever want to read them, and also the odds of me rereading the book again. Like, I will absolutely reread this series again, so I'd want to keep this book. Slash, how happy do these books actually make me in kind of a Marie Kondo sort of way. So yeah, comment down below, let me know how often do you actually reread your novels. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon at the new video. Bye! And let me know what you read this past month. So, I'll leave the Goodreads links down below. Goodreads links. Oh my gosh. Goodreads links. Okay. I feel like that's gonna wobble a little bit.